Forces News was filmed from Typhoons as they responded to calls from Iraqi Security Forces on the ground who'd come under fire from so-called Islamic State fighters. Flying over northern Iraq, they pinpointed the location and dropped 2 Paveway 4 bombs.
Iraqi Security Forces were working in the north of Iraq, approximately 20 miles south of Mosul. They were conducting routine activity on the ground and they came into contact with Daesh fighters. A number of Daesh fighters started employing weapons against the Iraqi forces and the Iraqi forces then called for support from the coalition. The coalition at that stage had 2 UK Typhoons overhead providing support and overwatch. And during that, we were able to work very closely with the Iraqis and the wider coalition to eventually work out where the Daesh fighters were, what the effect that the Iraqi forces requested, and then ultimately employ Paveway 4 500-pound weapon from Typhoon with a direct strike against those Daesh fighters who were shooting at Iraqi forces.
How many Daesh fighters were there?
We're still awaiting on the details from the Iraqi Security Forces as to the number of Daesh fighters, but there were a number of fighters engaged against the Iraqis at that stage. The Typhoons dropped 2 Paveway 4s, and in that they were able to not only neutralise the threat, but also allow the Iraqi Security Forces to then extract themselves safely.
Jets based at RAF Akrotiri have been flying missions against so-called Islamic State for 7 years now as part of Operation Shader, which is the UK's contribution to the US-led mission against IS over Iraq and Syria.
I think Daesh in their current guise are definitely in retreat. They're definitely reducing, and the threat that they pose to Iraq and to the wider globe and their ability to export terrorism is reducing. How long that takes and whether we can ever finally kill it off, I think the ideology will exist and will morph as we move forward, and the threat will continue to exist, but at a much lower level, something that is much more manageable. And our aspiration is that Iraq remains in the lead and that they're able to deal with their own security and stability.
Do you think RAF Typhoons will still be conducting strikes over Iraq and northern Syria in, say, 10 years' time then?
I would very much hope that that is not the case, but we know that we've been involved in the Middle East in the current guise since the early 90s. We know that the ability to export terrorism and extreme ideology remains, and that their intent is to continue in that vein. And so having a presence and the ability to control that and to be able to support the host nations and the Iraqi government is really, really important. And therefore we're reluctant, or I'm reluctant, to put a timeline on that because we will remain in support of the Iraqi government as long as necessary.
Back in March, the RAF conducted a 10-day operation targeting IS in Iraq with Typhoons from RAF Akrotiri using Storm Shadow missiles.
It was hugely important. It was hugely important that the Iraqi Security Forces were at the forefront. It was their operation. They designed it, they orchestrated it, and we were there simply to support. Employing Storm Shadow from Typhoon, whilst it was a first in the operational sphere, it is certainly not the first time that it's been launched from the aircraft, and certain targets demand certain types of weapon, and we always strive to do thorough weapons to target matching so that we are able to get the best effect. Really, the message to Daesh is that there's nowhere to hide. So whilst you remain on the run and you potentially pose a threat to us, we are watching, we are understanding, we are working closely with the Iraqi government, and there is genuinely nowhere to hide. And so we will not rest until we've rooted you out of even those most remote places where you attempt to hide.
As the Carrier Strike Group prepares to make its way to the region, UK F-35B jets operating from HMS Queen Elizabeth will join Operation Shader, bolstering the current efforts to defeat IS.
So the deployment of the Queen Elizabeth with her embarked F-35s really marks a step change. Just over a decade ago since we were involved in carrier strike operations. And the F-35 and the Queen Elizabeth really is a step change in capability. We're very excited to see both the US Marine Corps and UK F-35 operating from it, and we will be integrating it into Operation Shader. So we will have UK F-35s with all of the technology and advancements in capability that that platform offers, flying in Iraq and Syria to make sure that we are protecting the government of Iraq, the Iraqi Security Forces and the wider mission on the ground.
Air Commodore Strasdin sits across the whole of the Middle East, and it is a busy time as preparations for the withdrawal of UK personnel from Afghanistan are gearing up.
The announcement in Afghanistan has largely been led by the United States, but the wider coalition and NATO obviously taking a leading role there as well. And we've been able to do thorough preparation. We arrived in Afghanistan 20 years ago together. We've adjusted together and we will now depart together. And so I'm hugely confident that everything that we've put in place will allow us to leave it in very controlled manner and in good order. And we look forward to continuing to support the government of Afghanistan moving forward and the wider sort of resetting there of our relationship into a hopefully safe, secure and prosperous future for Afghanistan.
Meanwhile, with concerning scenes between the Israelis and Palestinians, he's keeping a close eye on developments there.
Well, we continue to monitor the situation in Israel and Palestine. We are absolutely supportive of de-escalatory measures and we hope that we're able to reach some agreement shortly from all parties and that we're able to de-escalate the situation.